All right, this is an important episode, very timely and very important to what's going on in media today. So when you tune in, give it your full attention. Um, but before we jump in today, let's do a little bit of business here. If you are unhappy with your health, you have things going on, and you go to your doctor and they're not really helping out with it, or you're not even seeing a doctor because for whatever reason you're not, but you got some chronic issues going on, or just run down, not feeling optimal, maybe you're aging, just whatever's going on. And if you feel like you can be doing better, you probably can. And you need to talk to my man, Christian Yordanov, who's a functional health practitioner. He does data-driven functional health. So what does that mean? If you sign up with him, he gets very exhaustive, very deep into your health. But you do this by doing different testing, blood and urine testing, and that are looking for different things, using that data to come up with a comprehensive protocol specifically tailored to you and what you need. If any of this sounds like it could help you, it don't even worry if it can, because I know it can, because it's helped me. I've been working with Christian for some months now, and within the first 6 months, I dropped 50 pounds. I went from having 4 energy drinks a day, 3 to 4 energy drinks a day, Red Bulls, whatever, to like maybe 1, maybe 2 a week, if that. Sometimes not even 1 week at all. So, and having plenty of energy, I can't even get into it. You hit me up, DM me if you want some more stuff about what he's done for me, because I'll tell you, I got no problem, because he is thorough. So go to livelongerformula.com and check him out there. Tell him I sent you. If you follow me on social media, if you follow me on Instagram, click my little link there at the top of the bio. I got a link to him. But yeah, check him out. If you need artwork of any time, go to tattooflashcollective.com. Now, of course, they have Tattoo Flash, but they have art prints in every size, from a postcard to a full-scale, crazy big poster. You check them out, tattooflashcollective.com. If you use the promo code BIGTRUTH at checkout, you get you get 10% off your order. If you are a Patreon subscriber, if you're part of the back channel, then you get even more off your order, but you have to sign up for that to get that code. But yeah, they got you covered. They work with artists all around the world. It is a collective. This isn't corporate stuff. This isn't culture vultures. These are people that are in the world, in the scene. My man Johannes is one of the owners, and you know him. He's a long time and like top tier tattoo artist. Now, the art prints, it's a whole array of subjects. It's not just Tattoo Flash. Now, of course, if you have a tattoo shop, these are the first people you should hit up. And what I want to tell you is that they have different levels. Like if there's a print you want, you can get it on like kind of cheaper poster paper if you just want like a cheaper thing. But you can also get like museum, like archival prints that will outlast you. It's like a family heirloom. So check them out. Tattoo Flash Collective. Going too quick here because I'm rushing. tattooflashcollective.com. Promo code BIGTRUTH, 10% off your order. If you're a back channel subscriber, then you get even more. What is the back channel? That is my Patreon, but that's where we get deeper. We go more in depth, deeper dives, more analysis, more backstory, get you more involved in the show. The back channel is both for the Big Truth podcast and also Big Truth Redacted. If you don't know what Big Truth Redacted is, go to Instagram and follow at Big Truth Redacted. That's my new page where I'm doing content. A lot of it is about the observation of power and how power is being played out on you, right? So some people can say it's conspiracy, but I am only going into things on there. Now, if you listen to the podcast, I get wild, and I'll get into paranormal stuff, wild conspiracy stuff. I like to have fun with it. But on the Redacted channel, I'm only going into things at this point. Everything is backed up with receipts. Like these are things where there's paperwork and proof, you know. It's like if it's a declassified program, or whether it's like, you know, things that can be backed up with court records or congressional hearings or, you know, news sources. So check it out, Big Truth Redacted. If you want to get more involved in the show, or you want to dive deeper with me, then go to Big Truth. It's patreon.com/Big Truth. Again, patreon.com/Big Truth. Again, I just freestyle these intros. I don't have anything written down. I probably should have something written down. It would go better. If you're into motorcycles, check out my motorcycle shop, Chop Ahead Custom Cycles, located at 13 County Road, East Freetown, Massachusetts. If you are not local and you want to, you know, rep, you want some parts for your bike, or you want to rep like a t-shirt or a hoodie or something, go to www.chopahead.com, and that's spelled CHOPPAHEAD. For more information on the podcast, just go to bigtruthpodcast.com. If you want to hit the store link, you can get some swag, some merch. You've got a few designs up there. More is going to be dropping soon, so check it out. And without further ado, we're just going to launch into it right now.
The Big Truth Podcast. Laying down the hatches! Get ready!
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
Yes, once again, we have liftoff. I want to thank you for tuning into this episode of the Big Truth Podcast, and I'm stoked to have Rob Rosen with me today, who is an investigative journalist, a publisher, well, not a publisher, sorry, a producer, an author, director. You a man of many media hats, and 30 years in the game, or over 30 years in the game. He's made TV shows, true crime series, The Reasonable Doubt, which you might have seen.
Still on HBO Max. You can stream it after we talk.
Oh, perfect. And then I didn't know. I know Reasonable Doubt. I didn't know the infomercials that sold us though. I'm not familiar with that one. And would you have Dennis Miller on that?
Yeah. So it was a 3-part limited series for Fox Nation, and I loved infomercials back in the day. I thought they were so funny and campy and cheesy, and I got some of the best, like, biggest names from that time to come on, and it was great. It was a lot of fun.
Speaking of campy and cheesy, you probably recognize this Creature Double Feature, Channel 56. You're a Boston guy.
Didn't Dale Dorman do the voiceover in between? Was that Dale Dorman?
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
From WRKO and then Kiss 108.
Yep.
I know. I miss my Boston media. Creature Double Feature. I know this is not why you're having me on.
No.
There's a movie that I saw as a kid that made such an impression on me. And it was this old woman is like with her husband, and she goes and sees an African tribe. And they said, we can give you a potion to make you young and beautiful again. But there's one catch. You need to kill a man a day to stay young. So she takes the potion, she becomes beautiful, and she's going from town to town, leaving this trail of bodies behind her. And I still always remember the very last shot. It's getting to midnight. The police are on her. She can't find a victim, and she jumps out the window, and there's like this crane shot, and it goes down, and she's like 8,000 years old.
Oh, that's
like
cool.
They made her. Yeah, that was a Creature Double Feature. Loved it.
Do you remember the name of the movie?
I don't.
No,
I don't.
That was the beauty of that.
Plugged it into AI, but I'd like to see it again.
Yeah.
But yeah. Oh no, I used to love that in the cartoons on Channel 56, and I remember. God, Willie Whistle seemed like a creep on Channel 38.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
They're like,
still is. If you watch it now, it's even worse, because I've looked it up not too long ago, and I'm like, this is even creepier than I remember as a kid. Yeah, clowns don't age well. Like that, they just get worse. You know.
That could be a title of a book right there. Clowns don't age well. I like it.
There you go. And then and fans of this show, like this show is kind of like a variety. We touch on a lot of topics. The main tenets are, we do a lot of stuff with motorcycle stuff and like music stuff, and then I kind of have like this, the last one is just like high strangeness. So it'll either be conspiracy stuff or paranormal, and things of that nature. And so
Well, you said paranormal.
I know
for
the Dead
15
Files.
seasons, I ran the Dead Files.
The Dead Files,
which is
yeah.
still, it was a huge
Yeah.
hit paranormal show, and it's on HBO Max as well. 220 episodes. Binge it.
That's crazy. That's crazy. And that you were executive producer on that, right? And a showrunner.
Yeah, and I directed most of them, like probably 2/3 of them. And yeah, we were out there on the road. Big family going all around the country. We did a couple in Massachusetts.
There you go. And then right now though, what we'll talk a lot about today is Crimes of Omission. Your book that just when did that actually drop? When did that was released?
It's dropping June 2nd.
Oh, okay.
But, could use the pre-orders. So if this sounds interesting to you, please go onto Amazon and put it in your basket or give it a pre-order. It would help a lot.
Yeah, and this was totally unintended, but if you watch my redacted content, anyone that's listening or watching, I dropped a piece on media just earlier this week that sort of ties into this in a way. So this is very timely. But let me ask you, before we get into that stuff, before we get into media and, media bias or media influences or whatever, Dead Files, what was it like working on that? Like, do you have an interest in paranormal, or was it just like the show was just
I don't think I did. I was doing Kitchen Nightmares with Gordon Ramsay.
Okay.
This was like 2011, but I was in the Top Gun on that show. And then my agent at the time's like, yeah, there's this paranormal show. They've done like 8 episodes, but they're looking to make a change. They send me some clips from the show. And I was like, I don't know. I have some ideas how I would want to change this and make this better. And
they liked it.
And yeah, I became interested in the subject, but even more so, to me, what interested me more than the actual paranormal, which I don't know, I can only admit this years now that it's been off the air for a few years, but I think I was more interested in the people and their belief system.
Sure.
Because we met people, God, their lives were on hold. They did not feel like they could go on with their lives as long as they had a haunting. And they were so raw and so emotional, and that interested me. The belief, how over the course of the week they changed and they had to face some things about themselves. So it was interesting. I think we had staying power because we didn't just make it about like the ghosts. We made it about. It was really a story about the people.
The people, yeah, of course, and that's great. While you were making the show, though, was there any things that were really unexplained, or was everything pretty much being able to?
I will say this: the medium we worked with, this woman Amy Allen, she was very, very rigid in a good way about. She couldn't even know where we were going to do it. So I'm like, it's January. I know we're going to Buffalo. I'm like, I kind of want to tell her to pack warm. Couldn't even tell her that. Nothing. She would just bring suitcases with all sorts of possibilities. And not every time, I'll be honest, but sometimes she got stuff that I was like, I don't really have a huge belief in this, but either like she's got some sophisticated way of figuring out what we're doing, or there's something here, because she would do sketches with a sketch artist of like dead people she had seen. And there were some times where it was eerie how much it matched, like a grandmother of someone, in the house who had just passed away. And it's like, whoa. Or, someone who had lived there and died there, 80 years earlier. So, there was I had moments. I can't tell you I'm like I'm all in and a full believer, but I was an open-minded skeptic.
Sure. And that's the best way to be, especially if you're, making content in that field, because you don't want to go all in. And I don't know. At the end of the day, I feel like I'm the exact same way. I'm an open-minded skeptic. The world is more interesting if any of this stuff is true or real, right? The world's more interesting than we think, if it is. And at the end of the day, it's like, it's easy to debunk things that are obviously set up, but in general, like none of us really knows what goes on afterwards. You know what I mean? You don't know until you die.
That's the number one question, right? So in ancient Egypt, it was the sun god and the water god and the mountain god, and we have organized religion. And I feel like New Age paranormal mediums, in a way, are fulfilling the same role. They're trying to answer the question that, truthfully, we probably will only find out when it's time.
Yeah, exactly.
but they're offering an alternative explanation.
Absolutely. So from unexplainable paranormal media to true crime stuff into a kind of discussion and critique of the media and media omission, meaning, we don't get the full story. We don't get the full story of the paranormal, but we don't get the full story with anything, really, do we anymore? Like, the media seems to have an agenda nowadays, or be more in line with a messaging or propaganda, or doesn't tell the whole story, or will only run a story for so long, or will suppress a story, or there's a lot going on. And I have a feeling that's the crux of your book. But tell me about your experience in media and what made you get to this book, and then let's talk about the book.
Yeah. So look, basically, I mean, I came up through journalism. I grew up in New England. It was kind of a little bit of a messy household. And so I was someone who just, if you couldn't tell from me talking about Creature Double Feature, I retreated, only child, I retreated to television. Like that was my, sports and horror movies and sitcoms and news. I was a weird kid. Like I loved watching newscasts, and I wanted to be a part of that world. And so when I left Boston University and I had a degree in journalism and film, I started in news. I started in newsrooms, and I write in the book. Like I feel like those newsrooms actually raised me. Like I learned how to deal with pressure, how to lead people, how to work under pressure, how to think, how to get a bunch of information and really condense it into what's important. And so it does pain me to see where journalism has gone, because I think that from when I started, and I started in like late 91 in San Diego at a CBS station, to where it got to, let's say by the point of the 20 teens, it was a real different beast. And the theory of the book is that a lot of people think the media lies to you. They don't lie to you. There is a team of lawyers in most of these big cable news outlets, or at 60 Minutes. They don't want to get sued. Sometimes it happens, but sometimes something slips through the cracks. But for the most part, they're not going to lie to you. But what they're going to do is withhold. And so that's how I came up with Crimes of Omission. It's stories that do not fit a narrative will not get run. It's just like it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Elements of a story will not get run. The focus of a story is a big part of like where your empathy will lie. And that's a crime of omission. It's not that it's not true. It's that why did they choose to focus on this one thing? And just as a quick example, a couple weeks ago, there was the guy Lebanese American guy who strapped his car with all these fireworks and explosives and drives into a temple, all right, in Pennsylvania, where there was no congregation. It was during the week, but there were 100 preschool kids, ostensibly to create maximum damage. NPR does a story, and they go to the town in Lebanon where his brother's from, and it turns out his brother is a Hezbollah commander, which was kind of downplayed in the article, but he had been taken out by an airstrike. And so now this story is written from the point of view of like he was trying to avenge the death of his brother. That's a crime of omission, right? There's nothing, it's not untrue, but can you imagine after the Oklahoma City bombing that ABC News would send a reporter to upstate New York where Timothy McVeigh was from and say, let's try to find the reason he might have done this. Let's try to empathize with him, right? So these aren't lies. It's where are they directing your attention? Where are you not supposed to look?
Yeah. Or, the other thing I've heard or have experienced is that the media will in a print article, they'll bury something like 10, 12 paragraphs in or towards the end of it. So it's there, but most people haven't read all the way down to the bottom. So, I mean, when did you, you said in the 2010s it started to turn. What do you think turned? Like when did journalism go from just reporting the actual facts and reporting the news and being objective to what's going on nowadays?
So it was a slow process, and I don't think it's a conspiracy or anything like that. But This book, by the way, tells the story of crimes of omission through the lens of the anti-police movement of the 2010s.
Okay.
So it starts with Trayvon Martin and takes us through the summer of 2020 and the riots after the George Floyd the murder of George Floyd. And there are a lot of elements that come into place, but I would say there was something about 2012 that it wasn't just journalism, but it was happening in a lot of professions throughout the country, where you had kind of these radicalized kids who were coming into the workforce from elite universities, and they were looking to challenge the mission of these professions. In journalism, as far as the old school is concerned, objectivity is a core value. Walter Cronkite said the mission of a journalist is to hold a mirror up to society. And that's the way most people saw it. Was it perfect? No. Was there some sort of a bias? Sure. But the attempt was there. And it was, if you watch the ABC Nightly News with Peter Jennings in 1998, you were getting a pretty good idea of what was going on in the world.
Yeah.
Then you had this kind of new wave of so-called journalists who came in and saw it as a means of affecting social change. And that is not what journalism is supposed to be. That's activism.
Yeah.
And I think there was a confluence of events, but with Trayvon Martin, followed by Michael Brown and some of the other high-profile cases of police violence, you had a movement that was being billed as America's long overdue reckoning with systemic racism. Nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of that history. Nobody wanted to be engaged or accused of engaging in all-siderism, all lives matterism. And so I think there were a lot of things happening at once. It was great television. So as far as the management was concerned, watching these towns burn themselves down, made for pretty must-see TV. And you had race, and you had passion, and you had violence, and you had these murder mysteries, and you had court cases. So, management was going along with it. It was good for ratings. I think for some of the younger staff members, they felt that they were part of an important social movement. And so I think you had sort of this, both people wanted the same things, but for different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. And from 2000, the 2010 to now, where are we on the spectrum? Like, I feel like with corporate media, it's so different than like we already started talking about. It's so different than when I was a kid, right? Like when you only had the 3 stations or 4 stations or 5 stations at most, and the news was the news.
Chet and Natalie.
Yeah. But it's like, and nowadays it's like there's so many. You got cable news, you got the big networks that are still running news. And then you have like the news channels like CNN and stuff, and then you have Fox and MSNBC, and and then all the cable channels, and then all like the alternative media now, like with podcasts or blogs or Substacks or what have you out there. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of news out there coming in different things, and not everyone that's giving news is a trained journalist anymore. It's wild times, right? So people trying to decipher like what's going on, like so you brought the narrative from the stories starting in 2010 and going on to that. Are you seeing anything like new going on like in the 20s that's like even going on broader or beyond what you saw or what you wrote about? Or why did you choose that specific? Actually, before we get into any of that stuff, why don't we talk about why did you choose that specific timeline? And
because during that time I was doing Reasonable Doubt, I was steeped in looking at cases where the system got it wrong. We were looking at possible wrongful murder convictions. 9 of the cases we profiled ended up being let out of prison, and some of them were exonerated. And so I knew that the system could fail, but I was watching this reporting and it felt very, very one-sided. It was, in journalism, if you do it right, you start with an open mind, like we said, open-minded skeptic, right? You start with a story and you just gather facts, and the facts kind of lead a path towards a conclusion, but they're doing it opposite. They're starting with the conclusion.
Yeah.
America's systemically racist. The police system needs major, major, major revamping. we have a enormous problem and we have a reckoning. Anything that wasn't going to fit into that was just not going to be included. So you started getting this sort of like self-censoring, which was like a combination of confirmation bias and also just fear, right, of not wanting to be accused of not being on board this very important movement. So to me, that this was an important way to do it. I mean, look, you could have done crimes of omission on COVID. You could have done it on a million different things.
Yeah.
But I thought this was probably the biggest story of the 2010s.
Yep.
It's one that I felt I understood. And I also thought for readers to be able to read these chapters, and I really try to write it like a true crime story, like Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. Who were they? How did they meet up that day? What really happened? And how did it become the number one story in the world? Because what few people know is for the 3 weeks after he was shot, there wasn't a story at all on the national level. The family attorney, Benjamin Crump, who was a civil rights attorney that the Trayvon Martin's family hired, outsmarted the police and found a way to make this the biggest story in the world.
Mm. And yeah. As I can remember that being all encompassing on the news for so long, and it's how does that, I guess, how would an attorney, or how did that attorney kind of pull that maneuver? Because there's also every day there's so much going on. And how did it get to be where that was such the focus?
All right. So in the little town in Florida, there's a newspaper that just covers the news of that town. And they wrote maybe like 3 articles in the first 3 weeks about this shooting. It was not a story.
Yeah.
And one of the local news stations did some stories on it. Otherwise, no one was touching it on the national level. And I think in large part, it's because basically you had a very typical, crime scene video, which is, we can all close our eyes and just imagine it, the yellow tape. And you really just didn't have anything else. There was no video taken from the scene of the crime, like as it was happening. But Benjamin Crump was pretty smart, and he was he started putting a ton of public pressure on the police department to arrest George Zimmerman, which they just didn't feel that they had the goods on him yet. So then he started saying, well, at least release the 911 tapes. So George Zimmerman, who was a neighborhood patrol officer, had called. It was a non-emergency line that he had. He had called, and that call was recorded. And then 5 or 6 of the neighbors in this gated community had also called 911 when they heard the shots fired. He's like, release that. And they were saying, no, no, no. And he kept pushing and he kept pushing. And I think the police department thought, okay, if we do this, he's going to get off our backs. But Benjamin Crump understood what news needs to tell a story. They need something dramatic. They need something, pardon the pun, explosive. And those 911 tapes suddenly took a story that nobody wanted to touch, and it became a headline story on every network newscast within 2 nights. Because now you heard George Zimmerman talking about it. You heard neighbors telling their version of what happened. You could hear the shot on some of the calls. Now you had a story. And so, look, it's like, unfortunately, it's the world we live in, like the Rodney King story. If George Holliday, who was a plumber that had just been given a video camera as a present, and he heard a commotion and he went out to his front balcony and started recording the beating of Rodney King. If he hadn't done that, nobody would know Rodney King's name, and none of that would have happened.
Yeah.
So, it's the elements of a story. And so that in that particular case, however, whatever you think about this case, and for the people who are watching this, you might think you know a lot about this case, but I promise you, read this chapter. There's so much here that was not told. There was a crime of omission. And I think you'll have a much better understanding of why a jury of 6 women, it was only 6 people on this jury, ultimately acquitted George Zimmerman.
So and then, what other examples do you have in that chat or in the book, from that time frame? I know there was the Trayvon Martin, obviously he's Rodney King. What other examples do you get into with in regards to media and omission? What are some of the big
Well,
ones?
I mean, I go through a lot of these police movement cases. I have a chapter on Philando Castile, who was out of Minnesota. That was the one where his girlfriend was live streaming right after he was shot by an officer. Eric Garner, he was the one who was taken down by the chokehold because of the loose cigarettes. Freddie Gray out of Baltimore with the alleged rough ride. George Floyd. I also get into, the history of BLM. Who was this group really? Who were they really? And I have an interesting back and forth with the 10-year editor of the Boston Globe, Brian McGrory, about why they didn't do investigative work into who BLM really was. And I get into, broken windows policing, all the elements that were omitted from this story that I think needed to be shown to give a well-rounded picture. And I'm not trying to hold anyone's hand. I'm not trying to lead anyone to a conclusion. But I feel pretty confident saying that anyone who reads this, and I think it's an engaging true crime kind of read, and I take you into, Shepard Smith, Ashley Banfield, some of the biggest names in news tell me their version of what happened and why these bad decisions were being made in newsrooms. I think that when you're done reading it, you're going to have a very different feeling about the entire movement of the 2010s and the way that it had been told.
Yeah.
Now,
being, a journalist and having worked in the field and seeing this stuff go on, like when a story is presented and then it picks up steam and it gets traction and then it becomes national news, obviously maybe not all the facts are known, or, and obviously these cases go and go on, as they go through trials and whatnot. But how do journalists, and anyone in the newsroom up to the editors, how do they deal with this kind of omission or this narrative? I feel like, and this is going to be a very simplistic thing, but like when you're a journalist, like you said, most people go into it to just tell the news, this is what's going on. But I guess, how do people wrestle with the, the ethics of this, you know what I mean? Kind of like slanting how a story's told. Like, is there an ethical dilemma, or do they just like, hey, this is what's going to sell, or this is what's going to get clicks, or this is what's going to,
I mean, the funny thing is it doesn't work for them. That's the funny part. The funny part is, if you look at the number of viewers for the network news 20 years ago versus today, it's less than half.
Yeah.
Now, there are other factors. It's not just that that they lost the trust of their audience, but that's a big part of it. If you look at CNN, there's lost a ton of viewership. Fox and MS now, they're doing their thing. They're doing fine. They're not going to change. But the funny thing is, they're doubling down on something that's not working. So no, I don't think it's like, oh, this is just, we're making so much money, so this is what we've got to do. And I don't even think that ethically, I talk to a lot of people. Look, some people recognize that there's a problem. But I would say in the bigger picture, you have a lot of people, you're in Boston, right? You have a lot of people who are big blue city creatures who went to really good universities. If they live in Boston, they live in some of the hip sections of town, right? And they go and they get like really fancy little dinners and avocado toast, not to be too stereotypical. And they have a Peloton in their apartment, and they go to the co-op and they buy vinyl records. And, they're creatures of big blue cities. Nothing wrong with that. But if you go into a typical newsroom, I would bet you if I walked into WBZ TV today and sat in the morning meeting, 90% of the people at least self-identify as liberal. Probably 100% are college educated. Most of them went to the same kind of institutions. So you have a lack of diversity of life experience and thought. So I don't know. I don't even give them like this malicious intent. I think they all think the same way. Hey, this is an important movement. BLM's an important movement. We want to be allies. We want to present we want to be part of this important moment. Problem is, whether someone believes personally that it was an important moment or not, it's besides the point. But that's not journalism's job. Journalism's job is not to wrestle with the ghosts of America's past. That's for professors and philosophers, and people can write about it. It's to hold up a mirror to what's going on today.
Yeah.
And that's not what they were doing. 2014 was being presented as if it was 1954.
Yeah. And that's what, and I've always felt like, it's like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's almost like when it gets put out there, it's this big of an issue when, and I'm not downplaying anything, but, out in the world, it doesn't feel like that big of an issue anymore. But now it's like becoming an issue again because the news is kind of pushing it forward. It's like they're supposed to put a mirror up, but they're also influencing what's going in the mirror. Like, you know what I mean? They're changing what's being shown in the miror, and
then
they're showing a more ugly reflection than what's really, in there. Or they're showing a reflection of 1954 instead of 2012. You know what I mean?
Right. So medical malpractice is an example. Tens of thousands of people every year die because of medical malpractice. It's a huge story that never gets reported. It's enormous. Now, I'm not downplaying what happens with victims of police violence, but in 2019, and this has been an often cited poll, how many people of color do you think who were unarmed were killed by police and encounters with police in the year 2019?
No idea.
Give me a guess.
100. I don't know.
Okay.
Unarmed, you said?
Yeah, so it was 14.
Oh, it was 14. Okay.
When they asked people who identified as liberal or very liberal, their guess was in the range of 1 to 10,000. Even people who said they felt they were identified as very conservative said 100, which is off by a factor of 7. Yeah. Right.
I just said 100, and I'm not. And when I say I'm conservative, I'm not left or right. I'm more in the libertarian range, So like that's
right. But I mean, but it just shows you. Look, when you have a relentless diet of cherry picked cases.
Yeah.
And over that 8-year period, roughly 2/3 of the cases of police shooting unarmed victims were not black.
Yeah.
But they did not run the media. And I have a whole chapter on a guy named Tony Timpa. Do you know who Tony Timpa is?
I do not.
Okay. When you read the book, you'll read his story. His story is incredible. It is worse than what happened to George Floyd by far.
Yeah.
Nobody knows his name. Why? Just didn't suit the narrative.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's wild. But like the thing is, the narrative itself, like I guess, have you looked into and it's probably, I don't know if there's a way to figure it out or not, but if you postulate, where does a narrative like that come from, and why does it get so big when the facts of what the reality is significantly smaller? Like, because
it was once true and it feels right.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's a little bit of,
I mean, people aren't going to go do their own independent research. Who's got time for that? Right. Unless you're a journalist or you really have a lot of time on your hands. You're watching CNN, and it seems like every other week you're seeing videotape of some horrific incident of a police officer who's shooting a suspect of color and seemingly getting away with it. And you're being fed a steady diet of that for 8 years.
Yeah.
And now you're locked down because of COVID. Of course, you're enraged.
Sure.
Why wouldn't you be?
Yeah.
And you want to go out and fight for change. But the problem with this coverage and why it was so dangerous, and I would say bordering on malpractice, is it didn't really paint an accurate picture of what was going on in the 2010s. Not to say that the police weren't dead wrong in some of these cases. They were. But taken as a whole in a huge picture, it was a really complex case with a lot of things for us to be proud of. There had been so many improvements.
Yeah.
And so this idea that we were being fed that somehow police violence was as bad, if not worse than it had ever been, just was not true. And, one title that I thought about kicking around, but I think would have applied here is, we were wrestling with our ghosts, but it just wasn't, it is not up to journalism to distort facts to try to help activists make a point.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And it's tough because I think too, in society now, everything's so fast that it's, and I know it's different in the 2010s because things were still so it wasn't as clickbaity or people just reacting to memes or only looking at a couple of lines of a story. But, you know, a lot of these, and it sounds like what you're saying too, is that a lot of these stories are there's so much depth to it, and there's so much like things that aren't reported on because, you know, people are only running with one part of it and not reporting on the whole story or like giving it in an objective way. You know, it's just allowing people to, you know, get the headline and react to the headline, but not see the whole context of what really happened.
Do you remember the headlines that ran for about 4 or 5 days about these high school kids from a Covington high school who got into some sort of a strange confrontation with a Native American group? And there was video that went very viral, and it looked like the kid was kind of like smirking at the Native American.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
a lot of like really famous people and some big name journalists like put in their 2 cents worth. And of course, that was a crime of omission. When the full footage was viewed, the context suddenly seemed very different. And it suddenly seemed like, oh, maybe it was the Native Americans who kind of picked a fight with these kids. They were wearing MAGA hats. So of course, this made them, you know, a target. But it was, this was an example, right, of the media running with something when they only had some of the story. The Jussie Smollett story, right? From the get-go, I remember the next day when I heard about it, I was like, this story sounds strange. 2 a.m, it's like 1 degree out in Chicago. You're in like a bougie neighborhood. You're walking the subway, and there's just like these guys just waiting with like nooses and like a KKK kit. Didn't sound right. I called one of the detectives who I work with a lot, and I'm like, does this sound right to you? And they're like, no. But the media unquestionably ran with it. And then, of course, 3 or 4 days later, now it's slowly backtracking and, you know, well, maybe we got this wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but the thing is, at that point, public, not everyone sees the retraction, right? Everyone, and the damage is already done, right? Because public opinion is already formed one way, because it was four or 5 days of the story being presented one way, and then a small retraction, and then let's move on to the next thing, whatever else is going on.
Right. And the retraction's never like the lead story that's getting these bold headlines. It's just kind of slipped in.
Yeah. So, I mean, what other ways do you think this kind of a mission, you know, because there's different levels of omission, right? Like, what other ways do you think, you know, in that time frame? But I would like to talk about now too, like if you wanted to get into that, but like in that time frame, what other ways were the media kind of omitting things? Like, you know what I mean? Whether it's like not giving the whole story, or you know, or not running. Not what we've just already been talking about.
I mean, there were so many ways.
Yeah,
like in the anti-police movement. I mean, I'm just going to name just a few off the top of my head, but it was like there were compelling stories like Tony Timpa's that I mentioned to you. They just didn't cover it. They just completely ignored it. There were things about the victims of these shootings, and I'm not talking about victim blaming kind of stuff. But for example, if you read the Michael Brown chapter, which was from Ferguson, which really blew up the whole movement in 2014, Michael Brown was, tragically like at a very strange part in his life and seemed like he was having some form of a psychotic break. That wasn't really widely reported on. Trayvon Martin, if you close your eyes and think of it, you're seeing this like very cherubic looking young kid, but the picture that they used in the news almost all the time was 4 or 5 years dated. It was from his like 9th grade or 8th grade. Yeah. And he was actually taller than George Zimmerman, right? But the idea was that this small child holding Skittles and some iced tea is attacked by a much larger and older man. George Zimmerman did outweigh him by quite a bit, but that was different. So I think the book really will go into it. And then contextualization. How often are these kinds of things happening now compared to before, right? Because what they were doing was building a case through anecdotal evidence. Every time one of these stories came up, it became a huge story. But they weren't saying, okay, we have, this has happened 11 times in 2017. But it's worth noting that 20 years ago, that number was 3x or whatever it was, right? So there was no attempt to contextualize, and there was no attempt to really put this all in the framework of the really good advances that have been made through broken windows policing with Bill Bratton. And everything in life is a trade-off. So a lot of thousands of lives were saved using some of these methods. Were the trade-offs worth it or not worth it? That's for people to decide. But I think you have to give people the right context. So instead, each one of these cases was given to the public with a very narrow lens that led you to the inexorable conclusion that the cops were guilty. And then it was circular reasoning, because inevitably juries or grand juries would refuse to indict. And that was just further proof of systemic racism. So it was just this like sort of circular argument. And again, I do want to stress two things. One, it's not the media's job to hold your hand and bring you to any conclusion. I don't think that they should have tried to make viewers, minimize the BLM movement. I mean, if people saw the whole story and still felt that this was a system that needed to be brought down, then that's their right to feel that way. But they need to be given all that information before they make that decision. And then the other thing is, I do want to stress, like, I'm not a sociologist. I'm not saying, in a university classroom, there isn't room for discussions about police and how they police minority communities and how they have historically. But that is not the function of a journalist. The function of a journalist, as your nickname is truth. Yeah. That's the one and only North Star. And so were they making a vigorous attempt to see in the mid-2010s whether or not the conditions that had once existed with policing in the U.S. still existed today? No.
Yeah. So an interesting thing is, and I wanted to bring up, and you just kind of hit on it, is, when these cases go through and, there's, the stories come out, public opinion is kind of, one way, then, they go to court or they go to trial, and if someone gets acquitted or isn't convicted, then it's like, okay, now this is further proof that, like you said, of systemic racism or something else. But, all the facts might not be covered, and so at one point, do you think media has, like, when is the media going from, hey, just there's some people that are, they come from a certain perspective, and they might be not coming from a bad place or a misleading place, but they kind of believe in this. But when should they admit they were wrong? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, when do you come from a place of like you said, you don't think
they should admit they were wrong, but they never will, because there is arrogance.
Will.
So, for example, Barack Obama's progressive attorney general, Eric Holder, put out a Department of Justice report about Michael Brown's shooting. Now, remember, media had been all over this story for almost a year, and had been there for every step of the way, from the rallies and the protests to the burning down of Ferguson in two waves, right? Once after he was shot, and then a second wave later on that year when the grand jury didn't indict. That report largely backs up the version of events that Darren Wilson, the cop, had. Yeah. Hands up, don't shoot never happened. That's a myth. That's apocryphal. He was never shot in the back, as many people had claimed. The DNA evidence seemed to back up the officer's version of events, including the witnesses also, that Brown approached the cop car, punched him twice, and was grabbing for his gun. And so this report is damning. After 8 months of relentless one-sided reporting, you would think the lead story on every network newscast would be, we got it wrong. The Department of Justice report from Eric Holder has mostly exonerated the officer in the Ferguson shooting, and a lot of the events that that activists say happened didn't. Instead, they chose to focus on another part of the report, which was important too, which said that even though in this particular case, the officer seemed to be justified in the use of force, that the police department had systemic problems and a lot of people weren't from the community and it wasn't representative of the community. Well, so if you watch CNN that night, Anderson Cooper, shocking revelations from Eric Holder's Department of Justice blasting the Ferguson Police Department, for systemic racism. So buried in there was the sort of the little caveat. Well, yeah, the Michael Brown case may not have been an example of that, but overall, so there was no reckoning. There was no sense of responsibility of like, wow, we have done this one-sided reporting for 8 straight months. We've let people comfortably in their living rooms watch a poor working class city burn itself to the ground. And now we've got this report that says that we basically got this story wrong, but we're not going to focus on that part. Look over here.
Yeah.
Here's a part that does back up what we said.
That's what I mean is like, how do we introduce accountability back in the media? Because, we've been given a lot of the examples today, are more, errors, upon or are on more left-leaning stuff. And I know the right does it as well, and they all kind of do it. It's just, it's so crazy that we live in a society now where the media has no accountability, politicians have no accountability. No one has any accountability except for the people, living life and paying for it all. You know what I mean? Like the middle class has plenty of accountability, It's just.
Well, the problem with that is because major institutions, whether it's medical or journalism, science, government, because people aren't trusting them, they're looking to alternative sources. And a lot of times those alternative sources are way worse.
Yeah, sure.
As much as NBC News had committed a lot of crimes of omission, you're better off watching them to figure out what's going on in the world than listening to Candace Owens. And, so the alternative, right? As much as the medical community lost a lot of trust, especially during COVID, do you want to listen to your doctor? Do you want to listen to the guy who's got a YouTube channel that says, pomegranate juice can cure your lung cancer? Yeah. So, the alternatives oftentimes are worse. So I hold journalism to a higher accountability than someone who just fires up a channel on YouTube. If you're a network news division or if you're CNN, you still have the money and the resources to have all sorts of satellite bureaus all around the world. You can do a live shot in Egypt, and you can take us all around the globe. You've got like great trained journalists. Like, give us a reasonable account of what happened, a full tour of what happened during a day, because I think the biggest issue in the US, and maybe you don't feel this as much in Massachusetts, maybe you do, is we don't live in a shared reality. Right. So families are breaking up over politics, couples, friendships, but I don't think that it's actually an issue of like not having shared values. I think it's just where you get your news from.
Yeah.
And so, right, we're fighting and splitting up because someone's going to one corporation to get their dose of reality as opposed to another one. And the bottom line is truth moderates. If you read crimes of omission, and I hope you and your viewers well, I don't think you're going to walk away from it and think, oh, wow, the police are squeaky clean. That was terrible what they did to them. And I don't think you're going to walk away. But I do think you're going to walk away and say, wow, this story was so different from how it was told to me. I'm kind of pissed that that the news had been distorted so much that I was so convinced that that this was going on.
Yeah. The problem is people are so polarized now that, us just talking about this right now would be like, I know there's people tuning out going, these guys are right side, these guys are conservative Republicans talking about this stuff because no one wants to digest the full story or the whole context or the gray area anymore. It's all black and white headline. Give me the synopsis in 3 sentences, and that's what I'm going to react to. And then my emotion's going to take over, and that's going to overpower any logic or reason or evidence that says anything else. It's tough to get people out of that nowadays.
Yeah, and look, journalism's not about left or right. I had my publisher. I asked her, "You read the book? You read the manuscript? Am I a conservative or a liberal?" She's like, I don't know.
That's perfect.
And then
yeah.
she did. Yeah. Well, she actually said then, she said, "You're smart, so I'm going to guess liberal." So I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just think that, look, great journalism, you don't know which side it's coming from. Yes, obviously, taking on the anti-police movement, which became a big part of progressive identity in the 2010s, is going to make the book seem like it's leaning right. But it is not. This is not a book that is trying to, you know, just paint the police as good guys and God, all those activists are troublemakers.
Yeah.
It's just trying to tell you the whole story, and then at the end of it, say, "Do you feel differently about it now?"
Yeah. Now, from your perspective as someone that's been involved in journalism for so long, and I know you've talked about this throughout the whole thing. I'm just trying to give people that are listening that may not have thought about this as in depth, or are hearing some of this for the first time. Like, what can people do that are like, just consumers, not people that are in, journalism? What can people do to kind of break themselves out of this, and to be a more informed, person and a more informed consumer of news? Like how can people get like more complete stories, or
Flip around,
Yeah.
because it's almost like every network has one piece of a jigsaw puzzle,
yeah,
and they're not going to show you all of them. So you need to watch a lot of it. And again, they're probably not going to lie to you. They're not, generally.
yeah,
But they're going to just tell you a little piece of it.
yeah,
And if you watch a lot of it, you're going to pull it all together.
yeah. So if you watch CNN,
I remember when the first night that bombs were dropping on Iran, what was it, like 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago?
yeah,
It was like a Friday night, and it was flipping between, at that point, it was late on the West Coast. It was CNN, MS Now, and Fox. Just flipping between the three. And it was interesting how, MS within 5 minutes had people on who were dubious that this wouldn't be a disaster, and that, was it legal? Fox was cheerleading. CNN, I think, was doing a reasonable job trying to just report what was going on. And so flipping between those three was a balance. If you had just watched MS Now or Fox, you would have walked away with it feeling a certain way about it.
yeah, yeah. And it's crazy because, one of the things too that I think confounds some of this is that these news stations have like the news, but then they also have a lot of people who are just, more opinion or commentary. And then people take that as news,
It's a big problem. And it's not just the nighttime time blocks, right, with the Rachel Maddows and the Sean Hannitys at night, but it's also panels.
Yeah.
So panels are a really cheap way to fill time.
Yeah.
And CNN might have a report filed from overseas in Iran. It's a good report. And then they come back and there's 6 people sitting around the desk and they're going to kick it around for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I think the viewer has a hard time knowing when the news report stopped and when the opinion starts.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is one of the things that conflates news and opinion. Because there's things, and I do get into this, like the world of the new school and the old school. There are things that don't need two sides. There are things that don't need to be debated. Like most things in the past are just, they happened.
Yeah.
Right. So we know today that the Red Sox are 1-5, and we know that our new third baseman Caleb Durbin has yet to get a hit. I mean, these are just facts, right? And we know that the S&P has corrected 5 or 6% or whatever the number is from its highs. We know the price of oil. There are some things that are just objective, empirical truths. And then there are things, what should be done, what's going to happen, predictions, all that. This is now into the realm of opinion because there is no objective truth on it. And I think that it is really difficult for viewers to be able to tell the difference on a lot of these cable news shows between where the empirical facts stop and where the talking heads, and the chattering class begins.
Sure. Because, someone's tuning in to CNN and CNN is their news station and they just see someone talking and they give an opinion, but now that's news to them. Or opinion is being presented as analysis, and then, people are getting that confused, some of it could be opinion based on analysis, but people are, it does definitely confound things, for sure. This is a whole aside from everything, but something that you talked about earlier with reasonable doubt, that you guys were responsible for, overturning some cases or exonerating some people. What kind of feeling?
Our reporting helped, but yeah,
or you contributed to that, but what kind of feeling did you take away from that? And for nine cases, like that must be.
I mean, great, but I think that there's an important distinction. Yes, I feel great that, good reporting got good results. And that's what good investigative journalism does, right? Investigative journalism can get companies to stop polluting rivers, or to stop, you might find out that someone like Harvey Weinstein is a predator and a rapist, or Bill Cosby, or you find out that, the Nixon administration was corrupt and you bring it down. That's all great journalism, or Spotlight, what happened, right, with the Boston Church. But you don't start with the end.
Yeah.
So we went into every one of those cases completely open-minded, and in reasonable doubt, I'd say 3/4 of the cases we thought the person actually was guilty.
Yeah.
And we weren't going to help exonerate them, and we wanted to help the family detach themselves from it, from the fight. So it feels great when it's done, and it's done the right way, and it's done for the right reasons. But if you start with the idea that I'm going to do this case and and this reporting is going to get someone exonerated, then you've already corrupted the process before you started. It is like Zen in journalism. Like, you have to be outcome free.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And if only the entire media thought that way. So I would be remiss of asking this, and I think I already have, but the way this has gone with the media having changed, starting in the 2010s and escalating, it just seems like, for you, is it something that it just happened organically and just a result of who's in the newsroom, and maybe their personal slants? It doesn't seem like for you that there's anything bigger behind any of this, and I'm not trying to tap it.
I don't think the corporate, I do some good background reporting on what was going on with CNN and Jeff Zucker during this whole period.
Yeah.
I don't think these guys are ideologues. They want good numbers and good ratings, and that's what their success depends on. And these stories were ratings winners. I mean, there were violence, it was passion, it was race, it was police shootings, and a murder mystery. I mean, it had every ingredient you could possibly want. And so I don't think that there was any high agenda, but I do think that slowly the 50-yard line of what objective reporting is kept moving.
Yeah.
By the time you get to 2015 and Trump is running for office the first time, and this police movement is burgeoning, and Me Too is about to start, you really hit an inflection point in media, where we were at a time of societal upheaval, and the media, which is supposed to be the ref in a game, suddenly wants to be a participant. And, now they're seeing themselves as their role is the last line of defense between us and fascism, and protecting democracy. And okay, once you start seeing yourself in that kind of light, now you're losing your ability to be a truth teller. You're now an active participant in this game.
Yeah.
So, I think it's mission creep, and I think it's a lack of intellectual diversity in newsrooms. I think there are quite a few factors. And, the first wave of TV news reporters in the old school, they were retiring when I started in the business. These were blue collar guys who, most of them started in newspapers, and most of them didn't go to college. Walter Cronkite never finished college.
Yeah.
And they didn't have to try to figure out what their audience cared about or who their audience was. They were the audience, and they didn't think twice about holding truth to power, no matter who you were. They were gonna come at you hard, and you were gonna have to answer for yourself.
Yeah.
And so now you have media where, depending on which side it is, they will attack the other side, but not their own.
Yeah.
And so you really saw that in California here during lockdowns, which, we had probably more of an authoritarian hand than most places. Massachusetts probably was pretty bad, but nobody's asking tough questions. I mean, 3 days after the lockdown started, I remember going to a Target. I was allowed to go there, but all these small business owners had to sacrifice their businesses. Well, why didn't spread the virus doesn't spread in Target and Walmart, but it spreads there?
Yeah. Well,
somebody's got to ask those tough questions, right? Somebody's got to ask those questions. Somebody's got to ask why in the second year are schools still closed and kids are suffering. And in Europe, all the schools were reopened. There were a lot of questions. And these, I'm not saying that the journalists should try to lead politicians towards an answer, but force them to back up and defend their decisions, especially the ones that don't seem to make a lot of sense. Give them an opportunity and the platform to answer it. But, the politicians here had a free ride. Nobody was going to question any of it.
Absolutely. And that's a big problem just in society in general. And I think that might be, a symptom of that happening in the media, but you don't see anybody anymore. Like when the president is a Democrat, all the people on the right will criticize the hell out of that person and look at that, but they don't, like the left and the right can do the exact same, can do the same wrongs, right? But the left will only criticize it when it's on the right, and the right will only criticize it on the left, and neither will acknowledge when their own party's doing it. And I think people on the street are doing that now, and I think that's kind of because media has kind of set the precedent for that. Like you don't see.
Well, like I've always said, I don't really have a problem with the way the media covers Trump, even though I do think they have a hard time crediting him when some things that he does work out, right? So they are relentlessly highlighting the negative, and there's studies that show like 95% of the coverage is negative. But the way they covered Biden was a problem, right? So the laptop, we were told, was a hoax. And, anyone who's engaged in social media and watching clips from like events could see that he was having a bad cognitive decline.
Yeah, that's
a big surprise.
Yeah.
But anybody who watched that debate with Trump in the summer of, what was it? Must have been the summer of 24. In the summer of 24, anybody who watched that debate and was surprised and was like, I can't believe the way Joe's stuff, they're getting a steady diet of mainstream news because through crimes of omission, they had no idea. They were being told, it was like Pravda, right? It was like weird, like Soviet Union propaganda. He's never been sharper or more engaged.
The word sharper, like it was like someone did a compilation of every time someone said the exact same sentence on multiple news, and it happens on both sides, and so it's just very wild how that works.
But it's journalism's job to cut through that, right? I don't expect political parties or White Houses to be sources of truth.
Yeah.
Right. They're working the refs.
Yeah.
It's a basketball game, and you got a coach.
Yeah.
Rick Pitino's up there, chewing in the ref's ear, hoping to get the next call. Right. But it's the job of the ref to not have any interest in the outcome of the game, but to call it as best as they can, and that's the journalist's job.
Yeah. Where do you think really good journalism that's, as objective as, can be nowadays is happening? Like, are there any standout journalists or
I mean, I
mediums?
think News Nation is trying. I really do. Barry Weiss, who's come in as the managing editor of CBS, the Free Press, I think they really try to be objective and not have any third rail issues. They were doing tough stories before anybody could do it. So, that's a big beast, CBS. But if she can make some inroads there, and I would be impressed. I think the Wall Street Journal, if you're going to read something, is pretty good. Their opinion page is definitely conservative, but I think their news page is center left.
Yeah.
Um, but pretty good if you're going to read a newspaper or a digital paper. Um, I would just say for anyone who's like getting alternative news sources, I put the news sources in quotes, like really be careful because there is, anybody can fire up a TikTok channel and
Yeah.
just cut 90-second videos saying bullshit.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't mean that they have any good sense, any credentials. And a lot of these kids who are out there, in some of these questionable protests, you hear them interviewed and they don't know much. They know what they've seen in some quick
Yeah.
TikTok videos.
Do you think there's do you think that kind of more objective reporting is something we're going to see in the future? Because it seems like both sides have had enough, right? And do you see that as being something that, is going to come back?
I hope for it. I
Yeah.
mean, I actually think it's more interesting. If you watch a newscast about an issue, let's just even say it's a shooting, a police shooting, and all sides are presented, and you really are seeing the story from all these different sides. It's like watching a good episode of like CSI Los Angeles or
Yeah.
Law and Order, like right in 1 second you're like, God, the cop was fucked up. Oh wait. Maybe there was a justification, and it's going back and forth. As opposed to the way it was covered, where who the good guy is, who the bad guy is. It's very predictable where this story is going to go, and it's like seeing just kind of a very basic like Marvel movie, which it has its place.
Yeah.
That's Fox and MS Now's lane, but I do think that ultimately it's not only good for the country, but it's good for ratings, for news organizations to go back to like real, objective, hard-hitting, truth to power news.
Yeah.
But that's the biggest thing. They do not call truth to power anymore. Only the power that they don't like.
Yeah, it's wild. And as a consumer of news, you got to get over your confirmation bias and kind of, like, I think what you're saying is click around and see all the sides before you make a final,
Yeah, the remote's your friend in this case.
Yeah. Now, just one thing I wanted to touch on quick, we talked about a lot. Do you think there's a role that, especially nowadays, that, like I touched on earlier, that, whether it's, we've seen things like where the White House or the FBI or CIA has tried to intervene with, hey, kind of suppress this story or put this out, or channels not wanting to piss off, corporate sponsors and stuff. Do you see any kind of bias or omission happening because of those type of channels, especially like nowadays? Like I'm looking in like contemporary times.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know that we've seen it yet, and but I do think that there's been attempts from this administration to influence how it's being covered or how the war is being covered. And yeah, I think that's that is a threat. However, I think Trump had a unique way over the last 10 years of putting the media on tilt. He's really hard to cover. I get that. And I talk to people who've covered him. Very, very complicated to cover. Very combative on camera, actually pretty warm off camera to press. But very difficult. But it still is, the second that media digs in its heels and says, this guy's a unique threat, the rules no longer apply, we're going after him, they've lost the plot. And more importantly, they've lost the trust of the public. Because you got to remember, this is a guy, right? He ran 3 times. He won twice. He's 2 for 3. There's a massive amount of people in this country who support him. And covering him needs to be objective. A lot of times he brings stuff on himself, and so you report. This is what he tweeted when Rob Reiner died.
Yeah, he doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't do himself any favors. When he just shoots off at the mouth sometimes. Yeah,
so you report it, right? Or but you also have to report when things work. Well, in term 1, unemployment among Hispanic teenagers or young Hispanic and Black men were at its lowest of all time. You have to report that too. And when people commit those crimes of omission and only tell you about the bad, there's tune out. And then you get this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, where if you look at the polls, people who identify as liberal do overall trust the mainstream news sources, but now even independents don't, and conservatives definitely don't. So it actually in some ways makes it worse, because then you now have this sliver of the population you've scared off the rest, and now you don't want to scare off this one by giving them any hard truths.
Yeah.
So right, so now
Yeah.
you're sort of stuck. You've stuck yourself in this thing, and in order to broaden your audience again, you got to take a chance of pissing off the few people you have left.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. Anything that we haven't talked about that you feel is important?
I mean, there's so much, but
I
I do
know.
think but I just do think in the big picture, and this is really how I try to address it in the book. I mean, this is ultimately a love letter to journalism. I do love journalism. I do love TV. You know, if just creature double feature.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that I want to see it restored to its place where, yeah, people will always have quibbles with it, but where if you and I watch ABC News on a Wednesday night, we walk away with a pretty realistic understanding of the big stories that are going on in the world, and that can be a foundational thing, because I think that, I really look now at like some of the things that I see on Facebook, on social media with people I know, the protests that I see. You start thinking you have irreconcilable differences. Like, people are just seeing the world in such diametrically opposed ways. How can you bring everyone back together? And I think there's only one way. Your nickname, truth.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the only way, right? And I think the more you know, the more it'll moderate your opinion. Most things are in the gray area.
Absolutely.
They're not black or white.
Yeah. And I try and say this on the show a lot, is that I think everybody has a lot more in common than the differences that are being kind of played and pushed all the time. Like, if you go out, people want the same thing. You want a good life. You want to be happy. You want to, have a roof. It's like, but when they have left and right so infighting that they forget that they probably agree on the vast majority of things, and there's like the 20% of the wedge issues that are keeping everyone apart, and it's
and where they really don't agree and they think it's a values issue, it's an information issue.
Yeah.
If you really have been told, you're watching MS now, that capitalism is destroying the planet and we have just a couple years left to straighten this or we are doomed. Well, that's a very different point of view than if you're told it's a hoax. Yeah. And those two people are not going to be able to have a conversation with each other. And of course, the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. As it always usually is, somewhere right in the middle, right? Like you gotta, you said
somewhere in the gray.
In the nuance.
Some things are more true than others.
Yeah.
I don't know. You don't need to have a debate on news about like, is rape good or is murder good, right? I mean, you can, there are things that don't need a second side, yeah. Right? You don't have to get a second side for everything, but there are things that I think, right now we have an issue with TSA and the funding of the TSA. I think a responsible journalist tells that story and shows the delays and gives credible people the chance to give their point of view of why it's the other side's fault, and then people can figure it out for themselves.
Yeah. Now, do you have any plans to follow this up? You did the 2010s and you could write a whole nother one just on the emissions during like you said, during the COVID era. Is any plans for
my publisher says nobody wants to relive those times? That was my initial idea. So like, don't do it. Don't do it. Yeah. So I stayed away from COVID.
Too soon?
I think so. I don't know. Even when I see people walking around with masks now, it makes me kind of like, gives me PTSD.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like I try and justify it by saying, well, maybe that person has like a real autoimmune issue or some kind of.
They're watching too much MS now.
Yeah, it's wild. But just the lunacy in what was being. I don't want to harp on it, but like you kind of brought it up. It's like the lunacy that in the I don't know, for lack of a better word, the illogical things they were putting out there, like you shouldn't have Thanksgiving, don't invite your family over for Thanksgiving. And that was really said during the height of it. Then the next day, you could go to Walmart for Black Friday sales and be in there with 2,000 people, and that was not a big deal.
And how many politicians were getting busted?
Yeah.
Like Gavin Newsom, our governor at the French Laundry, this fancy, I mean, I remember, what was her name? London Breed? Was that it? The San Francisco mayor? She was in a basement concert for Tony. Do you remember that group?
Yeah.
Feels good.
Yeah.
So she's down there and someone takes a shot of her. She's dancing without a mask, and they ask her about it the next day. And she's like, hey, sometimes the music plays and you just got to dance to it. And she was one of the biggest COVID scolds there was. So yeah, I think it would have changed if you had a skeptical media, skeptical press that wasn't trying to lead anyone to something. But look, you have an unprecedented decision by the ruling class and the heads of agencies in our country to lock us in our houses, keep our kids out of school, and to close a lot of people's businesses and livelihoods.
Yeah.
I think it deserves tough questioning and them having to answer the questions. And maybe they had great answers for it, but they were never asked.
Yeah.
And so, that's where I think there's a huge failure. And that's, one of the biggest missions and one of the biggest reasons that our free press is so vital to a democracy is to hold truth to power, but it's got to be all power. You can't pick and choose who you're going to go after and then give the kid club treatment to some other people. Yeah.
Why do you think it is the case that that's happening right now?
I just think it's what I talked about. I think most of the people, look, it's like why when you see scripted shows that are greenlit, and that's another element of the business in this town that's really struggling right now. But okay, I'll give you a good. Do you remember the movie Amelia Perez?
I don't.
Okay, so let's look it up.
Yeah.
So that was a movie. If I remember right, it did get nominated for Best Picture for an Oscar, but it was I want to say Netflix, and it was a movie that was a crime genre about a drug warlord who decides he wants to become a woman, and they made it a musical. And it is like, it's a time capsule. In 20 years, people look at it and watch it at midnight and drink and be like, wow, I can't believe this got made. Right? Like there's a scene in a hospital and they're all singing, the doctors, is it a boy? Is it a girl? Who knows? It's laughable, but who greenlights things like that? It's people in the blue bubble. This is something that they would want to watch, that their friends would want to watch. They're out of touch with their audience. So why does this happen? I don't think that if you went to a big city newsroom, if you went into NBC News in 2024, you would find more than a couple people who were willing to admit to you, who worked in those organizations, that they were going to vote for Trump over Harris.
Yeah.
I think it was monoculture. And so why do they do it? Because they have convinced themselves that he is such a unique threat to democracy, such a unique threat to the republic, that it is their job to be the last stand between the end of the American experiment and fascism.
Yeah. But I feel like it's been going on longer than just Trump has been around. You know what I mean? Like, but
it was more subtle.
It was more subtle. Yeah.
They do. I mean, I can tell you that I remember, late 90s, Monica Lewinsky, news journalists at that time went with that story with vigor, even though Clinton was kind of, a little bit of a media darling at that point. But they went after that story pretty aggressively.
True.
I don't think they would have today. When you had that woman, Tara Reid, not the actress, who had allegations of against Joe Biden of a sexual nature. And there were some things there that were fairly credible. She had told people at the time, or told a couple people. That story was basically buried.
Yeah.
Even
Even his own daughter. And I don't know how credible that was, but she had her diary.
Oh yeah. And the
They
diaries that she showered with her when he was 14. She was 14 or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did see that too. So look, these are stories that would have been the media 25 years ago. Maybe there was a slight left of center lean, but a good story was a good story and they were going to go after it.
Yeah.
Now you get to the point by 2024 where they're not going to go after it, or 2020, right? Where they are now invested in the outcome of this election. And so they don't want to do anything that might help Trump.
Sure. Cool. So when is the book? You said it's coming out in June?
Coming out June 2nd, but would love pre-orders. Crimes of Omission, wherever you get your books, by Rob Rosen. There is another Rob Rosen who writes erotic literature that is not me.
It's not you. Yeah.
Feel free to pick up one of those too if you want.
But
Crimes of Omission is mine.
Where can people pre-order? Amazon or your website? Or
you can go to Amazon. No, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever you get your books. Target.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's homework for everybody. Check it out and a good.
It's an entertaining read. I promise you, it'll read like a true crime mystery, and you will be blown away by just how different the actual story is from the narrative you were given.
Yeah. All right. And let's make that an effort for everybody. Get at the actual story and not just don't just run with the narratives, whether you're on the left or right, or if you're independent, you probably kind of already do that a little bit anyway, or hopefully you do, or you've just exonerated yourself from the whole thing and you're not paying attention to anything. I don't feel like we have the luxury of not paying attention anymore. So get in the game.